As you can see, I have a brown sweatshirt, and what I would like to do is turn it into something that I could wear at work. So my plan is to turn this sweatshirt into a cardigan. And one of the things I'm going to have to do that is divide the sweatshirt in the front evenly. So I'll need to cut a line from top to bottom. And then I'll want to remove this ribbing on the bottom. You wouldn't absolutely have to, but I don't like how it gathers and I would rather it stay straight. Most of the time your ribbing will cause the cardigan to kind of pull to the back of your outfit. So like as you're looking at it, it doesn't hang straight in the front. So I'm going to remove this. So how I'm going to do that is I am just going to cut basically on the line that's been provided here. And so I'll just use actually a scissors to do that, and bring my scissors in here and cut this ribbing off. Now, save that because honestly, there are plenty of projects that require you to use ribbing, and now you won't have to purchase it if the color is right. So I know like some baby bibs are made with the ribbing, and so you can use it for that. I haven't decided if I'm going to take off the cuff, the ribbing along the cuff here, but that is an option as well. But that's fine because I'm going to wear this in a winter anyway, so I don't mind if the sleeve goes all the way to the end here and has the ribbing on it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm not just going to lay down a ruler and cut or eyeball straight. I'm actually going to measure. So there is a seam on the ribbing. Now, to me, that seam does not look like it's in the center as I lay out the jacket or the sweatshirt to turn into a jacket. So I just want to lay it flat, and then I need to do some measuring. So what I'm going to do is, it's pretty easy at the top here because they've actually given me a point that's at center that they've created here. So I will be able to use that point, and then what I will do is I will measure from one side to the other, and I will mark a dot, and I will come up a little bit and come under the sleeve here, and I will measure from the sleeve point here to the sleeve point on the other side and find center and mark a dot. Once I have those 3 dots, I will connect them with a straight edge and mark it with a fabric marker, and then again I will use my scissors to cut on that line to separate this. So I will show you the process as I go along. So at first I thought, well, I'll measure and find the center first, but unfortunately that didn't work out that well because there again is a gathering in this knit cuff area. So what I need to do is take off the cuff first. So I'm just going to use regular scissors, and there is a seam already on here. So I am going to cut in at the seam. I'll just go right up to down the seam here and try to waste as little as possible, again, because I may want to use that on a different project. And then what I'll do is I will pivot so I get through this stitch line. I'm going to be careful there. And I will start to cut, hopefully you can see that, just above that stitch that's there. So I'm leaving as much of this edge as possible. I will go all the way around. As you can see, I've removed 100% of the ribbing along the bottom. That will go in my spare ribbing basket. And now I have a completely flat surface with no gather to it at all. that I can lay my tape measure on, making sure that the sweatshirt itself is laid nice and flat from top to bottom. And for this size sweatshirt, which is, I believe it's a men's medium, what I will do then is take this amount, which is 21 and a half. I will find center, which is 11 and a quarter, and I will put a little mark here. And then I'll come up underneath the armholes and do the same thing and align it with this top V. I'll probably even do a double check there about halfway up the sleeve and mark a dot just to make sure that that V point is in the center. And I can tell you that how this was folded at the store left a little bit of a crease, and it's a good thing I didn't use that because it is not accurate. So I'll mark it and I'll be right back. When you're marking on soft, stretchy type things like this sweatshirt fabric, there definitely is a difference in what works best as far as the kind of marking that you'll be able to easily mark and see. So on this particular project, I'm using what's called Miracle Chalk, and or I guess it's Miracle Markers is the name of the company, and it's called Miracle Chalk. It's a little hard to see because the light reflects on that. There's several of these in a package, and it looks like at the time they ran about $8. So the beauty of this is it marks very easily. Let me grab a piece of the ribbing just so you can see. Really easy to mark and see. But also it comes off. You just heat this with an iron and it comes right off. And it is a good thing that I did mark actual center because it was that tip, that point was off just a little bit. So I am going to ignore that. And actually, if you look, you can kind of see how this swoops down a little bit to the left here more than the right. So now I'm going to take my big ruler. I'm going to line up all my marks. I'm going to fill in the line, and then I will cut on that line with the scissors. And then I'm almost going to be done. And I am not going to cut off the sleeves, the ribbing on the sleeves. I have done that in the past. And this opens up kind of wide. And I think it looks a little, it looks okay. But you could narrow it up as it gets to this spot here. But again, I'm not dissatisfied with wearing this as a work cardigan with this part on. So I'm going to leave that on there. And I'll be right back. I just want to show you too that one of the cool things about this Miracle Chalk is it has this beveled edge on it. And when you have the ruler lined up, you just kind of stick it in the little cranny here and slide it like this. It slides really nice and it makes a nice fine line. I'm going to take this off so that you can see that a little better. Hopefully that helps. Time to cut. The next product I want to use is called Heat and Bond Stretch. And it's a permanent fuse, just like a fusible web, but I'm going to use it as a stabilizer for sewing a twin needle hem on the center and the bottom of my sweatshirt. So what I'm going to do is I am going to use this product and I am going to cut it into 1/2-inch strips. And that way, when I place it along the edge of the sweatshirt, it will give me a 1/2-inch seam. And I know when I press that over and fuse it down, it will stabilize that seam, but it'll also make a permanent bond. And then I'm going to come back in with my twin needle and top stitch that area. The Heat and Bond soft stretch comes on a roll, And so in order to cut those long strips, the easiest way to do that is have your roll there and use your mat to cut the 1/2 inch with your ruler. If you try to just cut 1/2 inch strips, as soon as you cut, the roll wants to roll back up. So set it on your mat with the ruler here, cut your 1/2 inch strip, and the ruler after you cut will keep holding the soft stretch flat. I'm at my ironing board and I have cut several strips of the Heat and Bond stretch light, the soft stretch light, and I'm going to take those strips and I'm going to fuse them along the cut edge, and I'm going to start with the center seams on my sweatshirt. So this is the wrong side. I have the paper side up, the fusible down, and the directions say to just press you're on the paper side for 5 seconds, then let it cool and remove the paper. And then for this section, so I have one piece, didn't quite go all the way, and I'm just going to do one piece at a time, right? But then I'll just cut a piece to size down here and fuse that on for 5 seconds, let it cool, and then I'll be removing the paper, and then I'll have a perfect 1/2 inch to flip over and then use steam to permanently fuse. You can see that I have applied the soft stretch along the inside edge of the sweatshirt. This is the back side on each, and I have pressed for 5 seconds, and it's cool now, so I'm going to remove the paper. The paper has been removed, and let me tell you, that was slick. Pressed for 5 seconds, let it cool, and it came off so easy. All right, now I'm ready to take, and I'm going to press this over using the edge of the tape as my guide for pressing. So what I'll do is, I'm right-handed, so I'm going to start at the top, and I will just flip and press and flip and press. And again, I'm using steam, so I don't want too hot of an iron because this is, you know, kind of a fragile fabric, I would say. So I don't want too hot of an iron, but enough that it generates steam. That's why I love my Velocity Reliable, because no matter what temperature I have it set at, I get perfect steam. It never spits because there's 2 motors. One heats the steam and one heats the iron. Okay, so again, this was super easy. I worked in about a 6-inch section at a time. So I would press it over so I could, look under, see where it needed to fold. Then I'd come in and press it with my steam. I almost always have a Teflon sheet on my ironing surface, but just heads up, when you use steam, that will bounce back off of this. So you got to get your fingers out of there kind of quick. So the whole length is fused down. It's nice and flat. It looks super on both sides. It's just a little wet because, again, it reflects the steam off, but it's perfect. And the second side is done. I just want to point out, though, that make sure you start at the top and work your way to the bottom. The top will have just a little slight angle. I think you can see that because of the curve of the neckline. But that's great anyway, because you'll never see any raw edge sticking out above here. And at the bottom, of course, we're going to fold that up. So we're going to now do the exact same thing on the bottom, in that we are going to place our soft stretch along the bottom here, 1/2 inch, and then press up. I'll just mention too that if you get to the end here, this is the bottom that I've used. If you have a little bit sticking out there, just trim that off. And sweatshirt fabric just it doesn't fray, it just kind of rolls up. So if there is any extra, it's not a big deal. But that little bit I don't want in the seam allowance anyway. So I'll just cut that square. The bottom has all been pressed. And so now what I'm going to do is I am going to come in with my twin needle, and I am going to stitch so that my needle, my second needle, runs right along the edge there. Two products that I'm going to use when I twin needle my seam is a Maxi Lock serger thread in a color that absolutely coordinates with my fabric. And since I am sewing on a stretchy sweatshirt fabric, I'm going to use a 4.0 stretch twin needle. Now, a twin needle has one shank, just like your sewing machine, regular sewing machine needle. So that's going to seat up into your needle position in your machine, just like a regular needle. Then it splits into two after that. And when you go to your machine, Janome machines have the ability, most of them, to hook onto the left side and to the right side for your two threads that will come through the machine. On this particular machine, I don't have two slots. This is the Janome 15,000. And what I do is I run one of them through this little slot in the guide here so that it's separated from the other one that will come down. So this one will float up in here and come down, and the other one will be threaded just regularly. And then one goes to the left and one goes to the right. Now, I don't want to have to buy 3 spools of this thread. So what I'm going to do is wind 2 bobbins. Of course, one will go in the machine in the bobbin area. And the second, I will put a separate spool pin on my machine. And so one will get threaded from my spool stand that I have next to my machine, and the other one will go on an extra spool pin that I'll put here. But when I thread them, once they come together here, I just grab both threads and I'm going to thread them through the machine path together. 2 threads together in my hand until I get to this area down here. And like I said, some machines will have a left and a right, and that's how you'll split them. This actually has a extra slot in the guide bar here that you feed that second thread through. So that's basically how it works. You're going to loosen the needle screw, take out your other one. Remember to cover your plate with something, a piece of paper or fabric, so that this needle doesn't fall down in when you're trying to change it. Save this needle because it's probably good. And then, or if it's been in there a while, it's a good time to change it when you remove the twin needle. Also, some machines have the ability to tell the machine you have a twin needle in. And that's a good thing because it won't allow the twin needle to go too wide that it actually hits the foot. So you have to think that, the twin needle is wider than a single shank on a needle. And so if this were to go as far left and right as it could with a single needle, it's not going to do any harm, right? Because it's all programmed that way. But if there's 2 needles there, and you go too wide, and I'm just going to do a straight stitch, but you could do a dimensional stitch, and in which case you should always, always, always test that with the hand wheel to see where that twin needle is going to come down on the left and in the right if you're doing a decorative stitch. But today I'm just doing the needles in a straight stitch, and as long as you have a 7mm or up opening in your foot, which probably 99% of you do, you'll be fine with any size twin needle out there. And we're just using a 4.0, so that's 4mm. So even if you had a 5mm machine, that would work. And they don't go below that, but unless you have a single hole plate on, which everyone should have the ability to do a zigzag. And if you do, then you wouldn't have a single hole plate. All right, hope that's clear. If not, there's great directions on the package, or you can go to schmetz.com and they'll give you more information on twin needles. I forgot to mention one thing. Why am I using serger thread in my sewing machine? Normally that's a big no-no, but it's a thinner thread. So if I think about it, I'm putting 3 threads where 2 threads normally go. So especially underneath in the hook area, 2 threads are going to go down and a thread is going to grab that. And so at some point, there are going to be 3 threads down in there. And I found that especially if I use like a 50 weight cotton in all 3, it puckers and it jams. So I found that the serger thread works really quite well. I've had a lot of success with it, but as with anything, everyone has a different machine, and different techniques work better for different sewers. So this is what works for me, and I'll show you how it ends up. But certainly always do a test before you're actually sewing on the project. So I have a 50 weight cotton thread sitting there next to this serger thread, and I think you can easily see the size of the thread is different. And now you're probably wondering, well, Diane, you have a serger and I don't, so what am I going to do with that big cone of thread after I'm done with it? Well, if you're doing any top stitching, most of that is decorative, so you would be able to use up this thread in your bobbin if you were doing some kind of top stitching. So it isn't for seams like in quilting where you're holding 2 pieces of fabric together and that thread needs to be strong. It's not like that. So anytime you have an application like that, but of course for me, I have a serger and that thread will serve me well when I'm done with this technique. So another option though, if you don't want to have to buy a cone of serger thread, and it's not that expensive, right? It's like $5. But if you have to use something else, maybe what you can do is, and I've done this too, I go to a 60 weight. So the higher the number, the thinner the thread. And normally we use a 50 weight. So 60 weight is a little bit thinner. And we do carry that in the store. And we have limited colors, but if you need a color for this project, you can always call and we'll be happy to order that for you, or you could just email. And so you would just tell us what color you need and we can get that in a 60 weight if we don't have it already. I have my machine set up for twin needle sewing. I have placed a bobbin there. I have another thread coming off my spool stand. They come together and they go through the tensions of my machine together as 2 threads. And you only separate them, and it really doesn't matter left or right which thread you put that way. It's just that at this point you have to separate them. And also either with going in the left and the right on a standard sewing machine, or on this one, you pull one through to the left and then you go through this slot up here on the top before you go through the needle on the right. And then, as I mentioned, always, always, always do a test. And so it should look like that on the top and like that on the back side. And I'm not testing on my knit fabric, so I'm going to go grab a piece of some leftover t-shirt or sweatshirt fabric so I can exactly see how it's going to stitch out, because sometimes your tensions seem a little too tight on the back. So one way to fix that is to put less thread in the area that you're sewing, and you can do that by lengthening your stitch length. So you can adjust your top tensions too, but honestly, with just a little pressing, this would lay perfectly flat. So I'm pretty happy with this. I think what I'm going to use is a 2.6 stitch length, and I should be all set to sew. I am going to use a 1/2 inch mark on my machine, and I'm also installing my cloth guide on my machine at a 1/2 inch. And that, because of the thickness of the fold, should, even though the needle's not right in the center, it should get me along the edge pretty darn close for the twin needle. So I've got the 1/2 inch on my machine that I'm using as a guide. And if you don't have a guide like this, which you may have, you should look in your supplies. They come with your machine. But if you do, it's a great longer extension for giving you this perfect seam allowance. And in this case, I'm going to stitch a 1/2 inch. And what I'm going to do is start just slightly away from the edge. I'm going to sink my twin needles. I'm going to sew to the back a couple inches and then come forward, and that will lock my stitch. I finished with my twin needle sewing. Probably took me 15 minutes to do the whole thing. I've just laid the sweatshirt out on my cutting or my ironing table. I have not pressed it. So look how beautiful and flat those seams are laying. And so now you can see that I did do a machine embroidery on the back of this sweatshirt already, even before I turned it into like a cardigan sweatshirt. But so you'll have this gap where the fabric used to be, but that's now in the seam allowance. And the bottom is finished, lays nice and flat. Make sure when you're stitching the twin needle, you can use a walking foot. I did, but don't help it through, because if you try to help it through, you're going to stretch this, and that's what we're really trying to fight. So at the top, that's what the seam looks like all the way down. And then at the bottom, what I did is, and a little more perfect on one side than the other, is I tried to stop where I knew the threads would meet. So it's just about a stitch short there. And then the going around the whole bottom, then I just stitched from the very edge. So this is what the back looks like there. And all the seam edges are covered. And I did put a little fray check right there on the back where all those seams start and end. I put a little here and a little here. And again, when I started, I always started back a little ways, and then, or away from the seam a little bit, and then went back and then forward, and now we'll lock it. But a little fray check never hurts, because you wear something like this, you're going to wash it quite a bit. Then I did try it on, and the sleeves were too long, but I rolled them up twice, and I actually kind of like that look of that soft inside coming to the back. And so I've rolled it twice, and if I had like a turtleneck or a longer shirt on, that would look nice with that color coming through here as well as down the center, and maybe even on the bottom, because this is a little bit of like a cropped cardigan. Because honestly, I bought this sweatshirt so long ago, I don't even know where I got it, but I'm sure it wasn't expensive, because I just got it as an embroidery sample sweatshirt. And now I've turned it into something that I am comfortable wearing. And I want to add some embroidery here on the front yet. So you won't be seeing me wear this tomorrow, but well, I say that, and then you never know. It all depends on what time allows. But ignore that part, because you won't be seeing that when you wear it. And then I haven't pressed this at all, but I will give it a nice light press. But you can already see that everything is laying nice and flat. So that's twin needle sewing on a sweatshirt, and using that soft stretch fusible to make your seams easily. And again, you can see if you do a 1/2 inch and you use a 1/2 inch seam allowance guide at the end, because you have the bulk here, it will stitch right along that edge. And if there is anything that's a little extra, no worries. Again, that has no basic effect at all when you wash it. All right, well, thank you. Hope you join club. If I get a chance to finish this, I'll show you a picture of me wearing it. Otherwise, you'll see me wearing it someday in the store. Thank you.